A very good afternoon to everyone. On behalf of Guru Shri Shanti Vijay Jain College for Women, I take immense pleasure to welcome you all to the sixth day of National Level Faculty Development Program on Innovative Strategies in Teaching Learning Process. My special welcome to our today's guest speaker, Dr. Divya Soni, Director, IC Associate Professor, LJ Institute of Media and Communication, LJ University, Hyderabad. Welcome, ma'am. Prayer should be the key of the day and lock of the night. Let's get ready for the prayer.
Om Namo Harihantanam. Om Namo Siddhanam. Om Namo Hariyanam. Om Namo Vachayanam. Namo Doi Savasahunam. Iso Panchanamukkaram. Sarvapavapanasano Mangalanam cha Sabdesim Padhamam Havai Mangalam Padhamam Havai Mangalam.
I request Dr. Satyapriya ma'am to give the welcome address and introduce our today's guest to the viewer. Please, ma'am.
A warm welcome and good afternoon to one and all present here. It's my immense pleasure to welcome today's resource person, Dr. Divya Soni, Director in Charge and Associate Professor, LJ Institute of Media and Communications, LJ University, Ahmedabad. Hearty welcome you, ma'am. Hearty welcome our Principal Ma'am, Dr. M.K. Malati ma'am, and our correspondent Sir, Dr. Gautam P. Vaid sir. And I also welcome all our faculty members and fellow students. I take the pleasure of introducing our chief guest, Dr. Divya Soni ma'am. She has presented a book review on how social media is ruining your life in a two-day national conference on influence of digital media in promoting sustainability. Advertising research and overview of theories and techniques was presented at the National Seminar on Research in Commerce and Management at Sardar Patel University. Tourism in Gujarat thriving on aggressive marketing was published in Facts of You. The Business of Emotions. This paper was published in Indian Journal of Marketing. She also secured university first rank in MCOM. She has designed and launched a YouTube channel for campus news and updates for faculties and students of LG. Handled sensitization and awareness campaigns for the channel. Developed content and delivered recorded video sessions on various topics of management for college YouTube channel and so on. Once again, I welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I request Dr. Divya Soni ma'am to lead the today's section further. Please, ma'am.
Yes, firstly, thank you for the warm welcome. I am happy to be a part of this 5-day national FDP, and I would also want to share my gratitude to the principal ma'am as well as Dr. Mahalakshmi ma'am for welcoming me for this FDP. Before getting started, I would want to know if the screen is visible to all the participants. A quick yes would help me go forward.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I would also want to thank ma'am for giving a good introduction to me. But in a very small gist, I would want to say that I have been a part of academics for some 17 years now. And like a lot of people who are in the FDP, who are faculties like me, I have also learned and shared a lot of information, a lot of knowledge through the past 17 years. And I'm hoping that this FDP would also make me learn of new things in education and would be informative for all of you. Now, moving on to what are we going to discuss in this session. So basically, there are three things which I plan to discuss in this session. One is what is effective teaching? And the second part is what makes a teacher effective? Because I believe all of us are attending this FTP so that we can become effective teachers in our respective programs. And of course, the last part, I'm looking forward to interacting with the participants and hearing their views on today's session. So let us start the session with the first aspect which I plan to discuss, and that is what is effective teaching? Now, all of us have different understanding of what effectiveness is. So on a lighter note, let us say that you took a wonderful session, prepared wonderful notes, the class understood everything, and then when you assess papers, you're disappointed. Like, I did everything in the classroom, and this is what the students write in the exam. So effectiveness means different things to different teachers. The one best description that I've found of effectiveness I would want to share with you, and that is effective teaching necessarily means that we leave an impact on the students. We also enable them, we empower them so that they can become learners. And of course, we are able to achieve socially valued objectives. In the simplest of the meanings, we do know as teachers that effectiveness means that you've achieved some objective that you set out for. Now, these objectives can be related to the program, could be related to your specific subject, the course, or to the objectives that you have set out for your individual classes. The second part, which I think is the core part of this session, is that what makes a teacher effective? And we as teachers are continuously in the process of learning as well as unlearning things that you've learned in the past. So I'm about to share different norms which are accepted, which are cherished across the globe by teachers, by experts, by researchers in this field. Let us take a look at some of them. Now, what are these norms? These norms, as I said, if you talk to people who are doing wonderfully, experienced academicians, people who are great teachers, people who do research on this, when we go across, majority of the norms which are commonly found, are the ones that I'm going to share in this session. The first one is planning. All of us as teachers need to plan and think before going to a session of the things that we want to do in the class. This is a very important step. What does planning entail? You must have realized as teachers, sometimes you're, let's say, going on a shopping trip, or you're sitting with a group of friends, some discussion in some conference, and suddenly you have an idea that, oh, I need to discuss this with my students. So I see teachers are always thinking of what can they take to their classrooms. And this process can last for a lot of long duration before the session starts. So all of this is happening before the session. One, you necessarily need to plan what you want to discuss in your class. What are the ideas that you want to throw at your students? What are the challenges that you want to take to the class? And you also need to plan according to the time duration. Now, I would want to emphasize a bit on the time duration part. The best part that has happened over the past few years, that all the universities and teachers, and I'm sure all the participants here as well, have become very conscious about their academic calendars, the duration in which they need to complete the course, and their session plans. And I think it's a very integral part of what we do. For all those teachers who think that it is more of an academic duty, I would want to bring to your notice that when we have a detailed sessions plan, we are able to do justice to every topic that we have. Sometimes even the most experienced of the faculties, we have seen this, that on in some topics or on some chapters they'll take a lot of time, and because of the time crunch they might have to wind up some topics in a very limited time frame. And when we do that, I'm sure all of us are guilty of doing that, but when we do that, we sacrifice, or the effectiveness of the course or the effectiveness of the classroom teaching is definitely sacrificed. So the best way forward is that we should know the exact duration in which we want to complete the sessions, and that session plan should be with you, if not with the students, but it should at least be with you, so that you can plan the work that you want to do in the classrooms effectively. Moving on to the second norm, which I would want to discuss, is structuring your content. Now, before we go to what content entails and what does structure mean, I would want to draw a very important point here, that when I was a student, a lot of students struggled with content, with information. They would go to faculties, they would go to the libraries. Internet access was not as easy as it is now. So, majorly, the teachers were performing a role of information providers, informational roles. However, things now are very different from how they used to be, and I'm sure all of you agree with that. Why is it different? Because information now, valid, authentic, interesting information is available easily. So there is a possibility that the student already has access to notes, to videos, to books, to ebooks, to PDFs from across the universities. So information giving, the importance of that has gone down a bit. And why am I sharing this right now? Because when we are preparing our content, we need to understand this, that there is a possibility that students have access to relevant reports, to recent things already. It is just a click away. So then what do we do for the content that we want to give to the students? One, the content that you want to provide inside the classroom. What are you going to discuss? What is your core subject? That needs to be prepared, that needs to be structured. But more than the information, the importance now is of the context and the relevance. Now, what do I mean by this? Let us say that a lot of information is already available to the student, but the view that the student should take, how to analyze that, how are things relevant to what they are studying in the class. I think if teachers take that task up, it makes the topics, it makes classroom interaction much more interesting. And even you can justify by taking up things which are recent enough. So let me give an example for this. Let's say there is something that you've been discussing and it is important, it is a part of your syllabus, but if something which is recently happening, because the student already knows about it, he will be more interested in knowing more about it. He will have something to contribute on it. So giving a perspective on the things which are already existing, having a flow, a sequence in which these topics need to be discussed in the class is again an important thing. So let us also draw some examples on the flow. There are a lot of teachers, and I have had the opportunity of learning from some of them. They will have a very different flow of discussing things in their class. So let's say a typical teacher might start from what is the topic that they are going to discuss in the class. This is the definition. These are the characteristics. This is the importance. That is one flow. There are some teachers who will have a very different flow. For example, they'll come to the class with a case that, okay, there is this company, this has happened. You don't know what is the topic, you have no idea what is the definition, what are you discussing, but they'll just throw a challenge at you, a question at you, and the entire class is discussing. And then midway, she'll draw some conclusions out of the discussion and say that this is the topic that we're discussing. So there are different ways of taking up a class, and that definitely will change from the sequence or the flow of ideas that you have decided. So the point that I'm trying to draw is, hopefully I'm making sense, that one, you need to know the content that you want to discuss in your class. Let it not just be informational, it should have context, it should have something relevant that the person finds value in. And of course, there should be a logical flow to discussing things, not just in one class, but throughout the course that you're taking. Let us move on to the third norm. Now, the third norm is the tricks up your sleeve or the repertoire of activities. Now, what do we mean by this? Every faculty will have a bouquet of activities that they want to offer their students. Now, some faculties can come up with team tasks that, depending on, of course, the class strength and the subject that you're discussing. But some will have, let's say, the class would be divided into multiple teams and they'll be given a task to do. So that can be an activity. Some teachers prefer that they'll give topics on which the students will present. The students are given observation exercises. They go out, not necessarily inside a classroom. They could be given a task to go outside the classroom or in the real world, observe something and come back and report on that. So you can have different activities, and these activities I think are of utmost importance. Why? Because they break monotony of a typical classroom. The student is excited that, okay, tomorrow we'll go in a session and we really don't know what kind of an activity we'll be engaged in. So I think having different activities which are designed according to the subject, according to your course, I think gives an edge to a faculty and also makes it interesting for the students. So the having debates or having discussions or having live projects that the student can do, these activities are an integral part. And I think the importance of these activities, I'm sure across universities, they are encouraged that list down activities which can be taken up as a part of the curriculum so that real learning can happen. So I think every teacher should design the activity plan for their sessions or for their courses, which will help them take the subject in an interesting way to the students. Moving on with the next norm, and that is a learning environment. Now, what do we mean by a learning environment? This necessarily the environment inside a classroom, whether that environment is congenial for learning, whether students find learning easy in the classroom, is of utmost importance for effectiveness. Now, what does it entail? One of the things is class management. And I must say this, I do not know the kind of participants we have in the FTP. But over the years, I've seen that whenever my young friends who have joined academia and who are learning, how to be an effective classroom teacher, they always come and tell me that, ma'am, when we try to make the classroom interactive, we find it difficult to manage class discipline. So we just discussed doing activities and we're talking about learning environment. Sometimes they can contradict. So I really wanted to add this point in the discussion that what do we mean by a learning environment? Your classroom should be effective enough so that learning can take place on its own. In that, the first thing is class management. And a lot of times, young teachers find it difficult because they don't want to sound authoritarian. They're like, how do we maintain discipline in the class? And how can you do that? I would also want to talk about that. One, this is an utmost, it is of utmost importance, right? So you cannot substitute classroom discipline. Why are we saying it is of utmost importance? Because the moment your class is not disciplined, the students who are the most interested or are engaged in the topic will find it very difficult to focus. And when we have some nuisance element going in the class, it is counterproductive to the things that we want to do in a class. And I'm sure all of the teachers agree that we have time bound activities that we need to do. We've made plans. So to execute those plans, managing the class is very important. And for the discipline part as well, I would want to add a couple of my observations in this. That how do we maintain discipline in class? A, it can be managed externally. Now, what do we mean by that? Every college or every university has certain rules that this is the way the student should behave in the classroom, in the corridor, this is acceptable behavior, this can't be done. Sometimes they have penalties. So that is also, they have CCTV cameras. All of this is done so that there is a discipline, a decorum that is maintained. However, there is an internal mechanism as well. Now, what do we mean by that? If you develop the students in such a way that they can self regulate themselves, they do not require CCTV cameras or a teacher or a class monitor or a tutor to uh, make them behave in a disciplined manner. They themselves are responsible enough. They behave in a responsible manner, and teachers can play a very important role in that. So one, try and invest that time in creating that rapport with the students, that you do not have to rely on external measures to discipline them, so that your classrooms become more effective. A small suggestion in this, majority of the teachers I'm sure are already doing it. When we start our course, or when you are introducing yourself as well as the course to the students, you can always specify the norms or the rules of your classroom. You can tell them that this is expected out of the students. These things are allowed and these things are not necessarily encouraged. If that is given and clarified at the beginning, I think it helps in conducting sessions in a smoother way. Moving on to the next norm, student centered approach. And I'm sure in the past 5 days, a lot of you have discussed about this in different sessions. What do we mean by student centered approach? We must think about the student's aspiration, his or her motivation of attending your class, their issues, as well as their perspective. So I've mentioned one thing here, that your session should be interactive. And the biggest difficulty that I'm finding right now is talking to a camera. I have been taking sessions for so long, but when we don't have people, who we don't see faces, we don't have responses from the people, it is so difficult to conduct these sessions. So to make sure that we are bringing value to the students, or the topic is going in the way that you had intended, you must ensure that students participate in your class. You should encourage interactions. And not only that, I will not say that you stop here. You should encourage students to challenge established concepts, to debate, to argue, to say that no, I have a different perspective on this. Why are we saying that this should be encouraged? Because basically, as teachers, what our duty is, that we are nurturing students who are thinkers. We want them to become thinkers and eventually implement things. So these students in the future are going to, let's say, come up with a new technology, design a new product, they'll come up with their own startup. So we want to inculcate this ability that they can think independently, and for that, it is a must that we allow interaction in the class, even if they are debating, they are challenging, they are questioning the things that are discussed in the class. From these discussions, very interesting and genuine value addition can happen. Very interesting insights can come out of such discussions. So all that, I think this again is can't be substituted. We need to have a student centered approach in academics. Moving on to the next norm, objective oriented. Teachers need to be objective oriented. Now, what do we mean by objectives in the first place? Every course or program that is being offered, I'm sure that all of them have program objectives, right? That this degree, these are the objectives the student will be able to achieve. If the student takes up this course or this elective, these are the course objectives. Now, those objectives are always a part of the curriculum, are always mentioned in the syllabuses, but they need to be remembered, be made a part of throughout everything that a teacher does. So, right from designing the curriculum to the classroom teaching and pedagogy that is happening, till the assessment, the relevance and importance of these objectives should not be forgotten. Whenever a teacher is doing all these activities and they are aligned with the objective of the course or the program, I think it is the most effective delivery of classroom teaching. So let us try to understand this. If we are discussing something in the class and the students are excited about it, motivated, they find it really interesting, They give their heart and soul to the activities that you have planned in their session. But then these activities or these learnings or these concepts are not a part of the assessment. They're not going to be evaluated on that. Trust me, next time when you take up those activities, the level of motivation of students would go down a bit because they feel that they did so much, but their grades do not reflect it. So, as teachers, it is our responsibility, and honestly, students can't play any role in this aspect. It is completely on the teacher and the management that whatever we do in the class has to be aligned with what the course wants you to do in the class. And whatever we are assessing should be based on the course objectives. If all the three are aligned, I think we'll be able to do justice, as well as we will be able to motivate the students, because even they will have an understanding of why they are doing it. Before going further, I just remembered a teacher of mine, and I would want to share an example with you. I'm talking about long back, so I think 2 or 2.5 decades back. We had this faculty in our class, and every lecture she would come, she had this small habit, and I think it is a good example of being objective oriented. She would come to the class, she would climb the stage, and on the left hand side of the blackboard, she would write 2 or 3 pointers that this is what we are going to discuss in today's class. So she'll have 3 or 4 things that she'll mention there. Then she'll spare some time in the class explaining us why do you need to study these things. The why aspect was explained. And all the students understood that we are studying this because it is a part of the syllabus. But when she would justify it, we would immediately realize that whether it is going to be evaluated, whether it is in a part of the syllabus or not, but these things are relevant for the outside world. She would clarify that in the first few minutes. Then she will start with her classroom discussions. And while she is discussing in the class, she would go back invariably on that stage and she would put a tick mark. She would say that right now what we discussed was this concept. All the 3 tick marks, the students would realize that yes, we've discussed what we had set out to do in this one session or 2 hour session. And then at the end of the session, she had this habit that she would go and on the right hand side of the board, she would write one takeaway, one thing that we learned which is worth remembering and which is not necessarily meant for your answer sheets or for your exams. This small exercise, it's a small exercise, no advanced tools that she used, but it gave a lot of clarity to the students that what are we learning and why are these things relevant. And when management and teachers do this day in and day out, right from designing their curriculums to assessing their papers, I think our collective effectiveness can really increase. Let us move on to the next norm. The most important one, resources. Now, to all my friends who make a lot of effort on, creating content, reading material, quizzes, and videos and whatnot. There are some of my friends who will develop cases, imaginative scenarios so that they can be discussed in the class. We can tweak our processes a bit here. Now, what do we mean by that? There are a lot of resources, rich resources available. And as teachers, I think there is no substitute to hard work, but there is also no substitute to smart work. We need to take benefit of the readily available resources, because if we use the resources available, let's say there are e-books available, there are blogs, there are video interviews, there are reports, some things that your peers might have done. If there is readily available resources, you must make use of them. What it does is it definitely reduces the effort and time that you are required to make for your subject. And in that time that you save, you can put it to better use for your own learning, for your class preparation. But we need to make sure that we are using resources, we are taking help. And taking help should be encouraged and should be appreciated as well. So if your colleagues have developed something, or your friends in another university have some content, you give them the credit. You can share it with your students as well, that there is a recent report which says that. But when you bring different resources to the classroom, when you share different resources, it helps in knowledge gaining, sharing, and also cuts down on a lot of time and energy. So you can, let's say, you go to the classroom, you tell your students that a recent report on the startup systems is this, or the upcoming unicorn, there is this interesting case study, or there is this blog that you need to read. So when we do that, even students find it interesting. They would come in contact with different sources, and they can further on keep referring to those sources for information, and even your effort is cut down. So I think you should try and incorporate as many resources as you can, and not try and do everything on your own. Let us move on to the next norm. Now, this norm, inclusivity. Mostly when we use this word inclusivity, we feel that we are talking about genders. Of course, it does incorporate that, but there are more number of things that inclusivity means. Increasingly, if you would have observed as a faculty, the diversity that we experience in our classrooms has really increased, which is, I think, a great thing for a teacher, for a program. But it also sometimes poses difficulties or challenges for the faculty. Now, what do I mean by the word that I've written here, diversity? Sometimes I will share an example of one of my classrooms. I had a guest session wherein I had to talk about advertising, and the session was for a college which was set up in a rural area. Now you'd be surprised. I normally discuss it as a topic which I discuss in my classrooms, and I've been dealing with for so many years. Majority of the brands that I discuss in my classroom, none of the participants were aware of those brands. Now, because we are as such a diverse country, there is as such a huge divide between what brands and what things the urban population does, the city culture, the semi-urban setup, the rural setup. So if you have students, and especially for those faculties who teach at programs where multiple streams can enter into. So let's say I have a program wherein a student who has completed BSc and a student who has done BBA and somebody who is a student of philosophy, they're sitting together and you're supposed to discuss. So one, this is definitely a challenge for the teacher, that what do you discuss? How do you bring the context? How do you make it relevant? Because everybody is coming from a different background. So by diversity, I mean, A, they could be from different streams, or they could be coming from different geographical backgrounds. There is a possibility that at your college or university, you have students coming from abroad and sitting. And for them, if you're discussing and you're giving examples, they have no idea what is being taught in the class. So the first thing that, as a teacher, the first thing that we need to do is we need to understand that our classroom or the students or our learners are diverse. Second, we should encourage that diversity. If we have programs which can be taken up by diverse students, it is definitely great for the program, for the university, also for the teachers, because the best of the learnings happens when there are people coming from diverse backgrounds. However, why is it difficult? Because A, the teacher has to make extra effort. You'll have to come up with examples that even a rural student can understand. A person who has, let's say, you're discussing retailing in your class, and you're discussing in the class, and you're like, you must have visited a mall, and the person is like, no, in our town we don't have a mall, we have only supermarket. So suddenly you realize that, okay, you'll have to create a picture, or you have to incorporate their aspect, their perspective in the class as well. So how to make relevant examples, how to give examples that students across the diverse backgrounds can also understand, is something that the teachers must do. There is a small thing that I would want to add here. How can we become better at celebrating diversity? One good practice is, a lot of teachers, before taking their session, they in advance share with their students, either they will share in a classroom digitally or physically, that in the next class they're going to discuss this. And the student who wants to attend that discussion or their group discussion or the presentation need to read this much and come. The moment you have prepared yourself as well as your students for the next session, I think this difficulty that you have, that a student doesn't understand what is being discussed, can be overcome. So I think it's a good way of sharing the next topic, the next session plan with your students, sharing reading material so that they can do some a little bit of research. Even if your international student is going to sit in a discussion on Amul and the branding and Amul products, he can at least Google, he can know what the company is, and come prepared so that he can be a part of the session. Moving on to the next norm, that is remaining updated. And what all of you are doing by attending this FTP is a part of this learning, upskilling continuously, because things are changing so fast. And if we go to a class and we don't know what are the recent developments, it definitely is demotivating for the teacher as well as for the student. So it is a must for every teacher that we find ways of learning, not necessarily conferences and FDPs and workshops or refresher courses. You can talk to your peers, you can have some industry academia meetings, you can talk to students as well. Students are, a lot of times we see that students have done so much of work, they have dabbled into different things, they've done internships, and even they can be a good source of learning. So learning should be a part of one's everyday activity if you're a teacher. And then upskilling, you need to learn new things as well. And I would honestly go beyond this and say that you should try to understand things which are not even necessarily in your domain, in your subject area. So a person who is completely, let's say, into retail should understand the technology, should understand IT, because if we are trying, I'm not saying go in as much detail because that's really not possible, but we should know what are the upcoming fields, because if we have idea of multiple fields, our classroom discussions become richer. So one, becoming experts in your own domain, updating yourself, and of course trying to understand what else is happening in the other fields as well, can help us become more effective. Now, all this that we discussed, I have tried to make a small, simple model of whatever we have discussed so far. What makes a teacher effective? First, what is being taught? The topic, the content that you are delivering inside the classroom, and the preparation that you've done for that. Second, how is it being taught? All your pedagogy, your the activities that you're doing is incorporated in this one. That how are we teaching in the classroom? Third is, where is it taught? So is it inside a classroom? Is it a hybrid mode? Is it online? Is it an activity which is happening outside the classroom? And what is the learning environment? So where is it being taught is important. Fourth, what has gone into it? The effort, the preparation. And here, the preparation of the teacher as well as the student. So, as I just said, that if you've shared details of a case that the student need to read so that they can sit in the next class for a discussion, then all of that will go into the preparation. But all of this is happening before the class. And the last thing, what to make of it. Now, the last part I would want to discuss a little bit. What to make of it is essentially the takeaway. This aspect means that when the learning has happened inside the class, but honestly, whether we have been effective or not would be reflected when the student remembers a classroom discussion in a real world setting. He remembers the definition, he remembers the concepts, he understands everything in the class. But if it does not help him understand the world outside in an easier manner, then we have not really created an impact. So if your student is going to his home, and while he is driving, or if there is a meeting he's attending, or he listens to a news item and he realizes that this is something that I discussed in class, I can understand this. If his understanding of the real world improves a bit by our classroom discussion, then that is a real takeaway in a real sense, and would definitely reflect how effective we've been in the class. I hope this model was simple and incorporates everything that we have discussed so far. There's some quotes and some sentences that I would have read across books. I'm sharing them with you, and none of them are written by me. I have used good resources. One is, without exception, outstanding teachers know their subjects extremely well, without a doubt. I will go one step beyond. They just don't know the subject, they love their subject. And their energy is so contagious that the students also feel energetic about the subject. The second quote that I would want to share is, great teachers have strong trust in students. They believe that students want to learn. And that is the only reason why they're sitting in your class. Trust me, no attendance policy, nothing has motivated them to come to the class. It is purely their love for learning, which is making them come to your class regularly. The third sentence, exceptional teachers treat their lectures, discussions as serious intellectual endeavors. So, for the first person who should realize the value of these activities and these efforts is the teacher himself, and then the students. Well, I hope the session was interesting, and I would love to interact and take some questions now. Do we have questions, ma'am? Yes, ma'am. Do we have questions? I would again want to ask if there are any questions, because I have not been able to see the chat. I would want to interact with the participants, and if there are any questions, do let me know. And if there are no questions, Nityashri, if you can hear me, I would want to know if there are any questions. And if there are no questions, I would at least want to share my contact details where any of the participants can reach me. And if there are any questions or anything that they would want to interact with, I would be more than happy.
Ma'am, no questions, ma'am.
No questions.
Thank you for your interested section, ma'am.
Thank you.
And Kajal. Thank you, ma'am. Um, Now I want to propose the vote of thanks. Good afternoon. On behalf of GSS Jain College for Women, It is my immense pleasure to give the oath of thanks for today's section. Firstly, I thank the Almighty God for his blessing to make this event a success. I think our respected principal Dr. N.K. Malati ma'am for her guidance and support. I thank our Honorable Secretary and Correspondent Sir Dr. Gautam for his motivation. My beautiful thanks to our today's guest and speaker, Dr. Divya Soni ma'am, Director IT Associate Professor, LI Institute of Media and Communication, LJ University of Hyderabad, for, for, for spending her time amid her busy and schedule and for leading today's FDP section. Thank you, ma'am. I thank the program organizer and coordinator. Thank you, professors. I thank the audience and viewers for being a part of this event. Eventually, I once again thank you everyone. I request all the participants to fill the feedback form. Let's raise up for the national anthem.
जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Thank you, ma'am.